We are working on Chapter 2 now in our Rails book, and the beginning part of this chapter focuses on, guess what? Installing Ruby and Rails and SQLite. But guess what? We've already done that process. But if you wanted to do a review of the procedures, or you want to read up a little bit on what to do, it walks you through the whole process. Now, this is a technology, remember, that is very Linux-centric. So often you will see these like little conventions here, like this is a Linux command prompt. And the $sign, that's part of what they call the born-again shell, the bash shell, which is available both on Linux machines, Unix machines, and Macintosh machines as well from the terminal. They use the same prompt, same commands, same structure. So they do walk through installing these technologies, but notice that these are older. All the technologies in the book are older. So if you try to follow this, it's really not going to work for you just because of the version differences. But yet it's still kind of a nice guide and an overview about certain things and the procedures you might want to follow. You'll also notice that it is not Windows-centric. If I'm not mistaken, the author of this book is very much a Mac person. So if you are a Mac person and you're interested in doing this, this will actually be helpful for you. And you know what? I do have a certain percentage of students out there that do work exclusively on Macintosh machines, in which case this will be very helpful. And you guys should know this, that if you ever decide to code on a Mac, that you do always have to include this tool called Xcode that I'm showing right here. Just simply because that's the interface from your operating system to the core C libraries that allow the Apple operating system to operate. So it just walks through that whole process, doing it on a Mac, walks through the process of doing it on Windows, and we use this process. Should look a little bit familiar. Yes, I'm glossing over it very quickly. And then, of course, they talk about SQLite, and here they very accurately show you that you need like 2 versions. And it looks like this is the same version that we just downloaded, I think 3.6. So it shows you the book is somewhat current. And of course, they show you install on Linux machines. So if you're running like Ubuntu or Linux Mint or Debian or one of those distributions, you can run that very beautifully on those environments. The one nice thing about, of course, running it on a Linux machine is most of our web servers, including our Apollo web server, is a Linux machine. And in fact, the majority of web servers on the internet are Linux-based machines. All right, now we're down at the bottom of page 19, and now we are going to work on what is, in essence, your homework assignment for Chapter 2. And part of this we've already done last week when we did our install, because in order to test the installation, we created a new application. All right, so there's going to be a series of commands we're going to type in here, and there's going to be a couple of new things that we're doing that when we get to it, I'll explain our way through it. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take my book and I'm going to try to split screen here a little bit. So I teach this class with intent on my higher resolution laptop. So my display on this machine is a 1920 by 1080. So it gives me a few more pixels than some of my other machines width-wise. And I'm going to attempt to make both the PDF readable and my command prompt readable, because I'm going to be doing most of my work in the command prompt. So I'm going to pull the PDF off to the side. It does make it a little harder to read, but I know you guys also have your own screens to work from. So I'm going to bring the command prompt up, and then I'm going to put that on the other side of the screen here. And this is a very typical layout for me when I teach this class. And that way I can show you what I'm lecturing on concept-wise, and you can see it in action at the same time, and then I get to record the whole thing on top of it all. All right, so right now on the left-hand side, I do have a command prompt window open, and I have to make an assumption that you guys know how to do that, but just in case somebody's watching out on the internet that doesn't know how to do that, all you simply have to do is hit your start key and type CMD, and that'll bring up the command prompt. Now, if you installed one of the bundled installers those will actually have their own Ruby on Rails prompts. It doesn't, folks, it doesn't matter which command prompt you use. You could use PowerShell, you could use the Windows command prompt, you could right-click it and run it as administrator. It does not matter, just as long as you have a Windows command prompt available. If you are working on a Linux machine, you're going to just have a terminal window open. If you're working on a Macintosh, same thing. You have a terminal window open, and in that case, your prompt will look exactly like what's in our book here, which is the $sign. Of course, on a Windows machine, we have a C prompt, or whatever drive you happen to be on. So first order of business is I'm going to clear my screen. So here's a really handy little DOS command. This is worth the price of admission right here, folks. CLS, I love that one, which stands for clear screen. On a Macintosh or a Linux environment, just type clear, the whole word, and it does the same thing. So get all that junk off your screen. The other thing that I like to do, and this is completely not obligatory, this is your choice, is what looks good to your eyes. Frankly, the default command prompt size in Windows, the font size and the color, it's usually white text on black, and it's much smaller than this, hurts my eyes. And yeah, and when I'm recording, nobody can see it. So what I do by default is I come up to this top left icon in the window, which also gives you a menu that allows you to actually control what you see on the screen. So if you click the little properties option, you'll notice that one thing you can control is the font, and you can actually choose different fonts. I don't really think that's necessary, frankly. Regular console font is fine, but I bump up the size. So I think the default's maybe like a 12 or a 14. Right now I'm at a 24. Yeah, that is a little big, but remember I have a larger display, so more pixels on the screen. The other thing that I do is I also go to the colors tab, and then usually I leave the screen background to black, but then I change the text myself personally to like a bright fluorescent green, or sometimes if I want to get like that IBM look, go for like the yellow or the amber. Frankly, it doesn't really matter, but contrast is what's key. For me, what is most contrasting on screen when I'm recording, and I've experimented, is this bright green on a black background, which of course looks very old school, but I like it. Another little fun tool that you can play with is this opacity setting, and I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but they actually copied this from a Macintosh environment and a Linux environment. They've had this for many, many years where you can kind of like see through. And it seems like it's kind of stupid, but a lot of times when you're doing stuff at the command prompt, it's actually kind of helpful to be able to see through the screen, to see windows in the background. Maybe you're looking at even code in the background. Who knows? But I'm going to leave mine set for 100%, but you can always tweak that if you want. So set it however you choose, whatever's most comfortable for your eyes. And go with it. Just remember that you can adjust it, though. You don't have to stick with whatever is on the screen. Other thing I'm going to do now that I'm at my prompt is you're going to notice whenever you launch a prompt inside of Windows, it puts you in your user directory. The same is actually true in a Windows or a Mac environment and a Linux environment, because they assume, hey, you're logged in as Takis Kinnis, may as well put you in your own directory because that's where you're going to work, right? Well, not in this case. We're actually going to work in the root of our C drive. So I'm going to type a command. I'm going to type CD space /, press enter, and that takes me to my root drive. That will also work in the Linux environment. Just a FYI. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type my dir command just to look at a list of all the directories and folders and stuff, and recollect in my head that I created a folder last week called projects. So I'm going to change into that directory by typing cd space projects. Once again, I will type dir, the directory command, to look inside that folder. And notice that last week I created an app called test app. Okay, that's not what we're creating this time. In fact, now I will divert over to our text here, where we can see they're creating our first new application. They want us to call it hello. So let's follow suit and do it. So we're going to use that exact command that you see in the book. So I'm going to type Rails new, hello. Before I press enter, I do want to make absolutely sure you guys are inside your projects folder or some folder where you're going to store your work. If you have the command typed in, go ahead, press enter, and then it will take a moment, and it will let it do its work, and you can see, just like last time, it's creating all the assets for a project. Once it creates all the files and folders by default, it then runs a tool called bundle install, which adds all the components that Rails includes in its framework. And I know we did this last week, but I'm going to just get you in the habit of scrolling back through and looking at what it just did, because it did a lot of stuff. And one of the advantages actually of the command line environment is I can go back and look at this. Try that in a Windows environment. Well, sometimes you can do it in Windows, but not always. So it goes through, it tells us all the files and folders it creates. Any files that it's creating are just plain text files, but you can see there's quite a number of them that are pre-created. Some with file extensions you may not have seen before. When it's done doing that work, then it goes ahead and it pulls in a tool called bundle install that pulls in all the dependencies required by the Rails framework, and you can see there's quite a number of different tools that are included. Because we already created this project before, not this particular one, but when we tested last week, notice none of this stuff is fetching and installing this time. You notice how it's just using? Oh, with the exception of one. Okay, one of them did. Okay, so we are fetching. So something must have updated since last week. And that's what happens. Right, so if it's getting a newer version or adding a new component, it'll say fetching. That's FTPing, folks. It just pulls it off the internet. Then it goes through the install, and it just proceeds. So for the most part, everything was already present. A few things were fetched and installed. And you know what? It's not a bad idea whenever you run a project, you know, it's kind of actually a habit you'll get into, is to run bundle install whenever you make any significant changes to make sure that everything is up to date like that. All right. Now in the book, they kind of go through and they show you what happened. And notice, you know, he started showing you the output of the screen, but granted, he's not going to waste like 5 pages of space to show you all the stuff that came up on the screen. So what he did instead is this, ... And I want to caution you guys, whenever you see that in the textbook, it's just like in the written word, it's just saying that there's, and the rest of the code. It doesn't mean it's not there, and it doesn't mean you're going to get ... on your screen, but I just want you to be used to that convention. One thing that the author does, right below where I highlighted there, is he wants you to look at some of the files that were created and kind of familiarize yourself with what was put there. Now, you know what a good way to do that? I mean, we saw the list above, but you know what? We're in a graphical operating system. Nobody says we have to do it from the command prompt. So this is where we kind of use that hybrid approach. So I'm going to bring up a File Explorer window and go to the, that's my G drive, sorry. I want to go to my C drive, and then I'm going to go to my projects folder and see how there's a new folder now called Hello. And it's not a bad idea to explore this space and take a look at all the things that were added and created. So I'm just expanding the size of it a little bit. Now, when I'm working with my File Explorer windows inside of Windows, I sometimes very naively assume that everybody is working the same way I do. So like when I bring a new computer into the house, one of the first things I do is I go into File Explorer and I make sure that I can see my file extensions. You know what? I am amazed at how many people that are IT people that don't even bother to do that. So the way that you do that, folks, is you go to the View menu, and what you might see if you're using Windows 8 or Windows 10 is you might see your File Explorer window look like this without the ribbon bar, but you can hit this little drop down right here in the corner, and it will show you the ribbon bar, which I highly recommend. Once you have that visible, click on View, and then notice over here in this area, where in Windows 7 we would have to dig into menus to find this stuff. Here it's just right there. And what I recommend at the very least is that you turn on file extensions for all the file folder windows. You guys are IT professionals, right? You should know your file extensions. Right, yeah. Give me the so-so. And you know what? I do the same thing on my Macintoshes too. Soon to be an IT professional. How about that? An aspiring IT professional. I will refrain from saying wannabe, okay? Because you guys will be, right? Or at least dangerous enough. All right, well, now I'm going to actually turn mine off for a second, and I want you to notice that not really a lot changed in this view, but there are a number of file extensions that are actually pretty critical, and I want you to notice a couple of files like this one, like git ignore .ruby version. You notice how those are, they start with a period? Isn't that weird? But this is something you guys should know. If you are using a Linux operating system or a Unix operating system or the Mac OS, if you start a file name with a dot, it's automatically hidden. Yeah, that's not true on Windows, ironically. Another thing that's kind of weird is a file like this one, the gem file. Notice the gem file doesn't have a file extension at all. No, that's not a mistype. The gem file, which holds information about the gems included in our project, is a plain text file without a file extension. Doesn't mean anything to any other program except for Ruby on Rails. All right. And then, of course, you will see some file extensions you don't recognize, and that's perfectly fine. And then you might see some that you do. You'll notice that there's a whole series of folders that are created. Majority of what we are going to do inside of this application, in all of our applications, most of our work will be completed in that very first folder, the app folder. And if you want, go ahead and open that up and explore. And then inside here, you are going to see the three main components of MVC: the models, views, and controllers. However, you're also seeing some of the auxiliary parts of MVC. Those are things such as helpers and channels, jobs, and mailers, and things like that. Most of the work that we're going to do is going to be inside this folder and mostly inside the models, views, and controllers folders. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. That's where most of our coding is going to happen. There's going to be some exceptions. For example, we will do some work in the database folder. And guess what goes into the database folder? Database stuff, yep, good. Guess what goes into the config folder? Well, in the config folder are configuration files. In fact, you could go in there right now if you want, and you're going to see a mix of what we call Ruby files, which end with RB, so that's Ruby code. And then you're going to see this, what they call a YAML file. That's how they say it. It's a YML, but it's a YAML file. We'll talk about that in a minute, so don't worry about that. And then some other file extensions that you probably never have to worry about, believe it or not. It's very seriously. And there's a lot of things in this environment that are there to make the application work that you don't need to mess with. In fact, if you find yourself messing with it, there's probably a problem you're trying to solve that you probably shouldn't be trying to solve in the first place, frankly. You know, convention over configuration, remember that, okay? Enough on that, but you should explore and you should become familiar with the files. Believe it or not, and you won't feel this way at first, by next month at this time, let's say like mid-October, you guys will like start knowing where to go inside the application and which folders to go to and where to find the files. You get used to it. Initially, it's a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're working strictly from a prompt. So don't be afraid to jump into the Explorer window and get the stuff this way. And we're going to use a mix, frankly, to make this all go. All right. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the built-in web server. Now, I will tell you that when they printed this book, they were using the built-in web server that was called WebRick. The current one is actually called Puma. So they changed web servers since the printing of this book. If you're using an older version, of course, you will find that it is a thing. Now, one thing that they will tell you to do is first run bundle install. So this is not uncommon, especially when you've created a new application or you've done something major to an application. Sometimes you just want to run this tool, and yes, I know it already ran, right, because I pointed it out, but it does not hurt to do it again. So I'm just going to type bundle install, but wait, it's asking me to do this where? I'm not even inside my project folder, am I? And see, this is one of the failings of the book, and one of those things that you learn from experience. Before I can run bundle install, you guys, I actually have to go into the folder where my application is. So type cd hello. Now I'm going to type bundle install, and I will press enter. And this is, now you see, everything here, it's not going to fetch a thing because we just did this, right? When we created the application, this is part of the process. But what this is showing you is that the process has evolved over time. Because it used to be that bundle install was not part of the process, which why it's written in. However, I will tell you from experience that if you're working on an application within this environment, that often before you deploy or when you move servers, or heck, just because a week went by, you run the tool to update things and to make sure that everything's working okay. So it also just validates that all the tools you have available to you are present and they're up to date. All right, so now we are inside our application folder, and now we're going to run to the next command, which is right here at the top of page 21. And to launch the web server, the command is formally Rails server, and you press enter and it starts. However, you will learn quickly, or if you go out online and read, that you can also just type Rails S. It does the same thing. It launches the web server. Once again, the difference is that in the book they have indicated the WebRick server, and subsequently they have changed to Puma as their web server. Just a different piece of software. And now you can see Puma launched, it is running, and it is active. In the command prompt side, it does not give me back a command prompt. What is happening right now, it's a live log of all server interactions that hit this server. You guys know from experience that we can look at the application that we developed so far by looking at a new tab here, and then type local host : 3000, so that our local web server is operating on port 3000. Press enter, and hopefully you get this, right? We did this last week. Never hurts to do it again, but it just shows you that the application built out, default content is in place, and everything is working okay. All right? That's really just a very simple test. Now, fascinating, take a look at the way the page used to look with version 4 of Rails. A little more primitive looking page, but this is what you would get. All right, so that was the indicator that you're up and running. All right, next thing that we're going to do is we are going to add a component called a controller. And I want you to notice right here in the book, and I'll just make this just slightly larger for right now. You know, whenever you learn a new language, what are you supposed to do? Got to write hello world, right? So that's what we're about to do. But you know what? We can't just like go into a text file and type hello world. This is Ruby on Rails. We're going to do something that actually will allow us to put that up on the screen, and that is we're going to generate a controller, which also will help us to generate a view. And I want to show you this command here, which is Very simple, yet powerful. And if you want, if you are working from the PDF copy, you guys, you can actually copy paste between this and the prompt. I think I mentioned that, so if you don't want to screw up what you're typing, if you want to type it, that's fine too. I'm doing a copy paste just because. But now, wait a second. My server's up and running, isn't it? Yeah, I'm going to Control C to stop it. And it says terminate batch job. I'm going to say yes. Now, a little food for thought here. We're going to add a component to our application. Do I really need to restart my server every time? And here's the answer to that. It depends. For some things, yeah, you must absolutely shut it down and restart it. Otherwise, it won't take. For some other things, if it's a simple change to a file, like a HTML template, for example, you don't have to. So what you might end up doing as you get more deep into this book is you might have one command prompt that simply runs the Puma server and another prompt where you do your work. And maybe another prompt where you do database and another prompt where you do Ruby. You could be doing all of that together. So it gets pretty cool. Pretty soon your screen starts to look like the Matrix. You got all this like stuff going on. I'm kidding. Yeah. Yeah. Thermonuclear destruction, right? All right. So let's go ahead and type this command in. I've got it copied from the PDF, and I'm going to paste it into my prompt. If you're using an older version of Windows, and I think I mentioned this last time, so if you're using anything earlier than Windows 10, you have to right-click and paste to get your stuff in there. With Windows 10, you can Control-V, right, which is a wonderful addition. All right, so Rails generate controller salutation. And I want you to think about what we're doing here. If you've done MVC work before, let's say in Visual Studio working with ASP.NET, in that environment, you right-click on your controllers folder and say, add controller, give it a name, and it creates it. And you guys know that it builds a bunch of other stuff with it. That's what we're doing here. Yeah, we're just saying, generate a controller named. I will tell you that the focus of this chapter isn't really to explain this process. We will get deeper into it in upcoming chapters, but nothing wrong with a little bit of a preview. So what this screen showed us just now is what is created after typing that command. So you can see that they created some new folders and some new files. So they created, in the app controller salutation controller, they created a Ruby file that goes with that. They also automatically created a view that goes with that. From there, they also built in unit testing. Now, for those of you that have had the Web 2 class, and I'm hoping you guys have all had that class at this point, I'm hoping, you know that unit testing is a thing that happens, especially in back-end JavaScript environments and a lot of application development. And unit testing is automatically built into the Rails framework. By default, it's just there. So if you want to run unit tests, it pre-creates the files for you. If you guys are not familiar with what unit testing is basically code that allows you to test your application without deploying it. So it just makes sure that your code operates properly, which is pretty cool. Automatically built some HTML helpers for us as well. That's a pretty standard thing. And then it also created resources so that we can write CoffeeScript or the shortcut version of CSS, which is called SCSS, and those are just pre-created automatically and attached to each individual controller. Now you might say, well, couldn't I just do I have to write CoffeeScript instead of JavaScript? No. Do you have to write SCSS instead of CSS? No. But they're just assuming that you're a modern application developer and you might prefer Coffee and SCSS to do your work, and it just does it. And is it kind of overkill to create a separate JavaScript and CSS file for each controller? It might seem that way, but you know what? That way that whole piece becomes portable then. Do you see the advantage? So if I wanted to pick up this controller and move it to a different application perhaps, all the pieces are attached. I don't have to worry about stripping out the CSS. It's already there, separated. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's a thing you would do, but something to keep in mind. All right. So now the book has us on a path of exploration, and that's where I'm taking us next. So they want us to go to this directory here in your folder structure. Now, I'm certainly capable of doing it from a prompt, but why go to all that misery when you can just bring up a file window? I'm going to go back to our application here. I'm going to read that folder, which was, let's see, app controllers, salutation controllers. So app controllers and salutation controllers, and there we have a Ruby file, right? Give it a right click, and then find some sort of a text editor. I'm just going to use Notepad++, and I know you guys all have your preferences, and really we don't need anything heavyweight for the work that we do in this class, but ideally it does color code for Ruby. I know that ones that I know that automatically color code for Ruby include Notepad++. We were talking about Atom earlier. Brackets will do it. Visual Studio Code will do it. Sublime will do it. And those are like free, lightweight Windows plain text editors that are designed for coding. If you're in a Mac environment, you might want to consider Text Wrangler. Visual Studio Code works in that environment too. And there's many, many other tools as well. But Notepad++ is what I'm using. Why? Because it's there. Yeah, basically. Now what they're having us do here is they're just showing us that automatically created for us was this empty class file. And notice how the class file is structured. It has the keyword class. Makes sense. Instead of a curly bracket to open and close it, they just say end. Class, end, done. Okay? That's very clean and very simple. Clearly the name of the controller is salutation controller, and it is a convention that when you use a controller, that the word controller is included. Why? Because it's a controller. Right? Yes, it is very verbose. And here's the thing about Ruby on Rails, folks, is that the convention with modern coding is to be very verbose in how you name things to the point of almost ridiculousness. But the mindset is we can use long file names, we can use long class names. It doesn't really matter. Our machines are fast enough these days. In the old days, we would worry about how many characters we'd use, right? every byte of data was precious. Not quite so much anymore. So be verbose in how you name things. Name things as to what they are and what they do. So that's a convention in Ruby. From an application standpoint, you're going to notice that we have this weird little symbol. What do you suppose that stands for? Close. Really close. But, in essence, it implies inheritance. But in most languages, we say extends. Or inherit. You know what? It depends on the language you're working with, actually, Richard, now that you say that. So, for example, in Java, we would say whatever our class name is extends the application class or extends a superclass that we've created. And this is no different. So we have an already built into the structure application controller that we are extending here. And by virtue of doing that, we pull in all of its capabilities. You can call upon any of its methods and use them in place. It is. It is because you already have that code created. Why would you write it again? Silly, right? So all you're going to add here is the stuff that's relevant to your application, not the whole application controller library. Right? So that's what we have here. We're pulling in from a superclass called application controller. What that class does, God only knows, but you can look it up if you really care. You can go online and get a list of all the methods, believe it or not. So that's really all they wanted to point out here was the fact that we do that. But however, they do want us to type in some code. Yay! So we're actually doing some work. So if you want, you can come in here and copy this code. But you know what? This is simple enough where I think I can just type it in myself manually. And here's some of the conventions, folks. Do not tab. Okay, even though we have this is one of the classic coder debates, right? Tab or space, or you know, indent like 5 spaces or whatever your thing is, or hit tab. Yeah, and some people are like, why would you tab? Why would you put spaces in when you can put a tab in? Okay, so the rule for this language, for Ruby, is all indents are 2 spaces. I didn't come up with it. That's the rule. Follow it. All right. So here, what's that? You know, I don't know. Let's find out. You do it a different way and see if your code works. Go for 3 and see if it still works. I know what's going to happen, honestly, but I want you to find out on your own. There are conventions for a reason. All right. So right now we're actually defining a method, and that's why they have def. We're going to call it hello. And then I'm going to indent 2 more, and then we're going to put in an @ message equals, and then just put in quotes. You can use single quotes or double quotes. Hello, Racine. You know, and for some people that is the whole world. That's why I do that. So I know that's kind of mean, but it's kind of true. You know, it always floors me if I run into people who live around here and they go, "I've never been to Chicago." It's like, you're kidding me. It's an hour away. You get the whole world at your doorstep and you have never been. Okay, so I'm not even going to judge, but I'm just saying. Okay, so hello, Racine, and then I'm going to type end here. That's indented 2 spaces. So the method's called hello. It's defined. So we don't say function, we don't say method, but we are naming a block of code here, and we're putting an end symbol in. And then notice that, well, @message. I don't know what that means. But obviously, hello, Racine is a string, right? Now, typically in most languages, whatever you put on the right side of the equal sign is being assigned to the left side, and usually it's a variable. Is this a variable? We'll define that later. All right. But we have some sort of construct, and we're feeding it hello, Racine. All right. That @ sign does have a special meaning, and in fact, if you guys have learned ASP.NET, you'll know that with ASP style tags, whenever you throw an @ sign in, it has a special meaning that you're pushing stuff back to the browser, is what's happening. All right, so go ahead and Control S to save this. And now, let's see what they're going to have us do next. They're not going to have us look at it next? Oh, no, they're showing us how to do the edit. All right. So next thing that we're going to do is we are going to go to another file in our folder structure. And right now we took a snippet of string and we assigned it to something called message. Okay. So now we're going to go locate in our folder structure, in the views folder, you'll notice that you have a folder inside your, if you go up 1 folder level in apps, so we're still in the apps folder, you'll find views, and you'll see that it also created a folder for salutation, and it is now empty, right? There's nothing in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a really simple little HTML file. In fact, we're not even going to follow all the proper rules of HTML. We're just enough to get it up on the screen, basically. All right. So we're going to copy this code, and we're going to come to our Notepad++, and we're going to create a new file, and then we're going to save it. So right off the bat, we're going to do a save as, and we're going to find that same folder. We're going to create inside the app views salutation folder a file named hello.html.erb. Yes, 2 file extensions. Right? Ultimately, we are creating an HTML file. The .erb stands for embedded Ruby. So this is an HTML file with Ruby code embedded within it. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then inside the file here, I'm going to paste in the code from the book. And if you want, you can do your indents if that makes you happy. I guess it kind of makes me happy, so I'm doing it. Now, those of you that know your HTML well know that we're missing stuff in our file, right? I mean, and you know what? If you want, you can add that stuff in. You want to put your doc type in there? You want to put a head, a title? Heck, you want to throw in some CSS? Go for it. That's not the point here. But what we are doing is inside the body tag, the part that is renders to the browser, we have an H1. And then notice inside that H1 tag, we have ASP style delimiters. For those of you that have learned ASP.NET, you will recognize this right away. We do bracket %sign to indicate that ASP code is to follow. And when you add an equal sign to it, that means we're sending data back to the browser. Additionally, we close with that. And if you want to compare, let's say you haven't had ASP yet, but you have had PHP. With PHP, what's our delimiter there? What do you do in PHP? You guys remember? You do this. You go, yeah, you go question mark, and then usually you add PHP after it, and then you write whatever code you write, and then you close it like that, right? That's how you do PHP. The truth is, in most embedded languages with HTML, they're done with ASP tags. So ASP.NET does it that way, Ruby on Rails does it that way, JSP does it that way, and that tends to be more of the convention. But this is embedded code. So this is telling the browser we're throwing in code from a different language here. So I'm Control S to save. That's what you need to do. And if you want to know where I got that from, see where it says it right here. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what this does. In one file, we have the controller. When the user hits that controller in the browser, what's going to happen is the browser finds the hello method. It triggers it. And all it does is it puts the string into the variable. And then in order to see the result, the view reads the variable, inserts it inside of HTML, and sends it back to the browser as HTML. All right, so make sure you save that file. And yes, we will learn more about how this works as we proceed. Another little tweak we have to make. Now we're going to go to this folder, to this particular file. And I want you to notice the name of it. This is in the config folder, and we're going to the routes Ruby file. All right, so here we go in our folder window. So right now I'm in views, salutation, but I want to go back up to the root, which is app. Excuse me, no, all the way up to the root, hello. And then find the config file, and then you will find the routes Ruby file, and then open that up inside your text editor. Right? And you can see if right now there's nothing in here. All right? And you guys can guess what starting with a £sign does. It's a comment. So notice what it says. For details on the DSL available within this file, see, wow, you can actually take the URL and go see how to do it. Okay. I'm just going to leave that alone. Whatever. Oops. Of course, I got rid of the end thing. That's not good. And I'm going to add some code here as I'm being told to do in the book, which is this. So we're going to add this little piece here. And I want to caution you guys here, and I want you to be really careful. Do you notice that the line above the one that I just highlighted looks different than the one that's on line 1 of my application. Do you notice that the one in the book starts with hello, and then it does applications, routes, etc. I am not going to change what the product automatically generated, even though the book's showing me something different. You guys catching this? Because what it generated is right for its current version. I'm not saying that what's in the book won't work, but if you didn't generate it, I probably wouldn't put it in. It's doing it for a reason. Versions change and approaches change. So I'm going to try it without making that change first, but I am going to add the line that I just copied. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to indent 2 spaces and paste it in. Now what we're putting in here is what we call, I forget what they call it actually, but it's a routes declaration. I think that's probably what it's called. That tells us the format of which our URLs will be structured for our application. So what we're saying is this application environment generates for us not folders and file names in our URLs. So like if I went to an application and I typed in, I want to go to the salutation folder, and then I want the hello.html file. Not how it works, folks. What I'm putting up here is a shortcut, basically. It's kind of like a sanitized URL that's controlled by the application, and I control the format of that URL. But there are certain conventions that we use. So we're almost done here. And I know you guys are looking at the clock, and I apologize. But basically what we're going to have is a URL that's going to look like wherever it was, like this, salutation, and then hello, where salutation stands for the name of the controller, and hello is the name of the method. Isn't that interesting? So really what we're doing here is instead of going to a file and a folder and a file, we're going to a class and a method. And so really what we're doing is via the URL controlling the application. Very powerful. The secondary benefit, of course, is that we have clean URLs. So make sure that this work is saved. So we can do a Control-S to save. And I think at this point we're probably close to having it run. In fact, we are. So what they want you to do is now relaunch your web server. So from your prompt, type Rails S, press enter. It's going to take a moment. The server should launch. Back to your browser, wherever that might happen to be on my screen. And I'm going to, first let's hit the home page. Okay, that came up just fine. Now I'm going to append to it /salutation /hello, and with any luck, you have this. And hopefully that's what you guys got up on your screen, or whatever, hopefully polite message you typed in there. Just, you know, if you're screenshotting this and turning it in, just remember, use polite messages, ones that will get you A's. All right, so now that is the chapter in a nutshell, and I know there was a lot kind of thrown in here at the end, but we're going to repeat all these steps. That completes chapter 2. So we added a couple little wrinkles to our basic application development. And I know for some of you, maybe you didn't get it going here in class, but the video will be out there hopefully tomorrow, and you guys can hop up and follow along. And you're also welcome to stay here in class if you need a little extra help. When we reconvene next week, we'll dig into chapter 3, and you'll see get something running is the name of the game here. And then from there, we will start diving into the Ruby language pretty deeply. All right. Thank you all, and we will see you next week.